Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Beebe Book Buzz, our monthly program where Beebe librarians from the Public Library in Wakefield come to talk to you about what we've been reading and share some ideas for things that you might be interested in trying for yourself. With me today, I'm Jeff Claves from the Reference Department, and with me today are Jackie Powers from Administration, our Assistant Director, and Beth Radcliffe, also from the Reference Department. So who wants to start today?
I will.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just read Sugar Run by Mesha, Maren, and this novel begins with the release from prison of Jody McCarthy. And she went in when she was about 17 or 18, and she's now 35. So she spent more than half her life in prison, and she was imprisoned for manslaughter. So she doesn't really know the real world. Like, she's been in prison all her adult life. So I just want to read you one little sentence from the book about how she feels about getting released. Perhaps, Jody thought, release was like diving, or rather, rising. You could die from that, she'd heard, coming up from the ocean floor altogether too fast. So just to give you a little feel. So
Is this contemporary?
it is,
Yeah.
The narrative takes place both Jody's life before prison and Jody's life after prison, and it doesn't really cover the prison part. So when she is released, she wants to return to her home to her ancestral home in West Virginia. Now, ancestral doesn't quite give you the feel of what her house is because it's a log cabin. There's no electricity. There's no plumbing. But it's where she's from. It's where she feels like home. And it's outside of this small little town that's very depressed. Along the way, she meets and falls in love with Miranda, a pill-popping mother of three young boys. So they hook up, and before they can go to West Virginia, Jody feels like she has to rescue the brother of her previous lover, who was a child when she was in prison and now is a man. But he is an abusive father, so she wants to go pick him up. So they rescue him, and they go on to West Virginia. In West Virginia, they face bigotry and devastating poverty and pervasive substance abuse. If it all sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, it is. It's a story of passion, violence, squashed hope, heartbreak. But so let me just say that this book is definitely gritty, right? It's dark. It's like noir.
Yeah.
But within that, the descriptions she does of the landscape is well, it's both lush and bleak because there's fracking going on, so that's pretty bleak. But the rest of the landscape is just beautiful. And I again want to read you a couple of sentences. Jody let Miranda's words roll over and around her. And there, in that dark, anonymous room, she knew that what Miranda said was true of her, too. I'd fit, she thought, and pictured the land in West Virginia, the smell of wheat in the field, and sunlight scissoring through the trees, the way the rhythms of the day and even the air around her had always felt right there. So nature and West Virginia, the whole atmosphere of West Virginia, they're a character in this book. They're another person.
And it sounds like redemption is kind of an issue here too, probably.
For Jody, it is, not necessarily other characters.
Not the other ones? Oh, okay.
She's striving to get past her past, but it keeps on getting thrown. Obstacles keep on getting thrown in their paths.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
I was just talking to Alexis about this. One of our Circ staff was reading this, and when I spoke with her about it yesterday, she said the characters were really well done, and the sense of place was really.
She does, and you don't often read about West Virginia.
There's another series. I don't know if you've read it. I can't. The main character's name is Belle Elkins, and I think the author's first name is Julia. I'm blanking on the last name, but I will find out. But it's a series, and it's in West Virginia. She's like the district attorney or county prosecutor or something like that.
So it's a mystery series?
It's kind of a mystery series. It's more like a procedural. She's friends with the chief of police, like that kind of thing. But it's that same gritty, but kind of beautiful like atmosphere. The country descriptions alongside like, the pervasive drug use and other the poverty, really.
The thing that she doesn't talk a lot about fracking, but it sounds like it's just destroying that. They went from mining, which was destroying it, to fracking, which is destroying it. But that's their livelihood.
Right.
So she's an ex-felon. How is she going to get a job in this depressed economy where
doing anything else?
Right?
There's not a lot of options.
So I'm not going to say any more about what she does, but so a couple of books it reminded me of was Jessim Ward's Salvage the Bone.
Oh, yeah.
Did you read that?
I didn't. But
that has the same really good sense of place. It takes place in a coastal town in the South, and it's for kids who poverty again, and they're struggling to get prepared for Katrina, which they're struggling to get prepared for their regular life. So that was one, and the other one was Edwidge Dunnicat and Breath Eyes Memory.
Oh, I don't think I've read that one of hers. I've read another one.
She's
lovely,
also so good at drawing the atmosphere, the towns. In that case, it's in Haiti, so it's the Creole life, but again, rampant poverty and not much place to go with it. A small town, little girls. Yeah. So that if you like noir, this is a good one to read. Do you think your husband would like it? Maybe. Yeah.
Thanks.
I can get him to read a book. Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
What did I read? The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. She wrote the 100-Year-Old House and The Borrowers. I did not read the 100-Year-Old.
Oh, I think I just gave that to
100-Year House
yesterday. It's orange, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
and that big?
It's big.
It's
big and orange.
I never have my book because it's always checked out. But she wrote The Borrowers, I think, in 2014-ish, which I had mixed feelings about. It was okay. This was really well done. There's kind of two storylines. There's Yale Tishman, who is I think he's in his 30s in Chicago in the 80s. And then there's a separate plot. Fiona she's now in her 50s, and she's in Paris for most of the narrative and present day, or 2016-ish, 15, 16. So you kind of go back and forth, and Yale's story takes you up to about the early 90s, and a lot of it is focused on the sort of AIDS epidemic in Chicago at that time, and it's really, really heartbreaking what was happening there, and his story and how they're connected. They're friends. Yale and Fiona are friends. Her brother was one of Yale's first close friends to succumb to AIDS, and so so that's how she kind of becomes enmeshed in his life, and she sort of ends up kind of becoming the caretaker of this whole kind of passel of gay men in Chicago at this time. And so a lot of the story is her kind of unpacking what that did to her. I mean, she ended up severing ties with her family because they didn't accept the brother who was gay. And so she really cuts ties with them. And so it has this lasting impact on her relationship with her daughter, which is why she's in Paris. She is chasing her daughter down, who's in her, I think, 20s. She hadn't seen her in several years when she went off and joined a cult. Ooh. And so she's been tracking her down. She's hired like a French private investigator, and she's staying with someone in France who happens to be a friend from that time in Chicago, who was a photographer who had documented a lot of what was happening at that time, and a lot of the people she knew. And so her brother appears in some of his photographs, and this other character, Yale. But there's a lot of other kind of pieces to it that she really works in there. There's a lot of, if you like France,
I was wondering,
there's not a lot of that, but she captures it really nicely. And it actually happens, it must have been, I think, 2015 when they had the terror attack.
Oh, the bombing.
The Bataclan.
Oh, yeah.
That was so. It happens when she's there. So, so there's that. There's also an art component. Yale is a kind of a, I guess he's like the art director of an up and coming gallery at a Northwestern University. And so it's sort of him building his career a little bit. He gets in touch with this woman who has this incredible collection of art that he wants to show, and her family doesn't want her to sell it or give it to the museum. But so there's like a lot going on, and it's really heavy and sad, but not in a way that is overwhelming. She does it really well. She has a nice touch, and it's in the way that Liane Moriarty or Jojo Moyes write about really heavy things without it becoming a drag, like where you're just like, oh. It's still.
Would you say it's a read-alike for those, or it sounds like it's still a little bit?
Maybe it's. I can't think of really what it would be that close to. The writing style is the closest to theirs, but it's different, and I think it's quite a departure from her other books. I think it's very different.
Is it saga-like in that it takes a lot of
Not
years?
really. It covers, so most of it, the entire time where you're dealing with Fiona, where in present day, it's like all in 2015.
Yeah.
She has a couple little flashbacks
okay.
to tell you how she got to that point.
Yeah.
But and then Yale's story is 85, 86, and then it kind of jumps to like 91. And so it's not, I mean, it's not covering this vast amount of time or anything. I wouldn't call it, it's not quite that.
The Tell the Wolves I'm Home, that has some similarities. I think that because it's AIDS, that the main character's uncle dies of AIDS, and she befriends his partner, who she didn't know before. And her uncle is a big, hot artist. So it has that.
Yeah, it does sound
but
there's carry on.
But I don't think it's as sweeping as yours is. And it's also, it could be viewed as a YA book. So it's, I think it's not quite
this
as
is not
depth,
like I wouldn't.
you know, but it has some similar themes of loss, and
yeah, and this is about
takes place in the 80s too, at the beginning of the 80s.
The amount of loss in this book is really incomprehensible. I mean, Yale's kind of at the center of this big group of friends, and you're just watching them drop like flies, and it just one after another. And there's this constant like who's next feeling to it that's, I can imagine, was unbelievably stressful at the time. Not that it's over, but I mean it's not in that same way. So, but I would really recommend it. It was really well done.
Good. Thanks.
Tell us something lighter.
I'm not sure.
Valley Forge is probably
Forge is not really. It's a different kind of depressing. Actually, both of the things I thought I would talk about today are very different for me, because I don't. They're two nonfiction books about early American history, and I tend not to read that very often, just because of my own personal interest. I tend to be more interested in European history or world history. But I read both of these just because of particular connections, which I'll tell you about, and I love them both, and they're both very recent nonfiction, and I found really captivating. And there's actually even some little connections to them, because I realized Alexander Hamilton figures prominently in both of them, and since I have not seen Hamilton, but everyone else on the planet has, anyone who kind of has become interested because of that in that time period, it's kind of interesting to see some of the backstory that is part of his life, even though he's kind of more of a peripheral character in both of the stories. So the first one's called American Eden by Victoria Johnson, and the reason I read this is because I have a friend who lives here in Wakefield, and who I know you guys have met, and one of her sisters is Elizabeth Kostova, who is the best-selling author who wrote The Historian and Shadowlands and what was the other one? Swan Thieves, on the New York Times bestseller list. And she has, believe it or not, in the same family, another sister.
Wow.
This is her younger sister, Victoria Johnson, who just came out with this book, which is about early American history. And I would probably never have picked it up if it weren't for that connection. And I actually met her when she came up earlier this fall to do a book tour, because she was going around the country, and it actually was just this week nominated for the as a finalist for the
Cool.
National Book Award
Cool.
for nonfiction, which is kind of exciting. And it was also a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. So picture this: you've got Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr early in the morning on, I guess it was, what was the date again? July 1804. And they're going across the Hudson River to New Jersey to have this famous duel. And who do they take with them? They each take a second, which is what you did with a duel. And Hamilton also took a guy named David Hosack, who was his personal doctor, essentially, personal physician. He ironically also happened to have been personal friends with Aaron Burr, so they both had a connection to him. So this whole book is actually really about Hosack, who he was very interesting in and of his own right, but he's like always in the background of all these other things that were going on at the time. And really the focus of the book is on Hosack as a sort of forgotten important figure in early American history. He was a scientist, he was a botanist, he traveled to Europe, he collected specimens. You have to bear in mind that botany at this time was very much connected with pharmacology and medicine, because before modern pharmaceuticals, so much of medicine was based on what you could do with different kinds of plants and what they're.
Is there interaction with Jefferson? Because Jefferson is
yes,
very interested
it does.
in botanical.
They're all in here. Yes. And it was his dream to build a botanical garden, a really high-quality botanical garden, to be able to study and learn scientifically from plants that he could collect from around the world, that was on a par with the kind of things that they were doing in London, at Kew, and other places around Europe and in the Old World. So he was just this really interesting pioneering figure and a very influential thinker at the time, who was always on the periphery of these very famous people like Jefferson and Hamilton and so forth. He was born in New York, and I think one of the things that makes it interesting is anyone who is fascinated by the early history of New York City would find it just riveting, because it's all about the time before New York was New York. There were fields, there were farms, there were, so the botanical garden, which he ultimately does succeed in building after battling all kinds of opposition and difficulties and funding and support and all that kind of thing. By 1810, he is actually able to start this botanical garden, and it was on the site where Rockefeller Center is currently located. So there's actually some memorial references to it in that area, because...
So did they destroy it or did they move it?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, and of course New York developed, so the idea that something that was, I believe it was something around 15 or 20 acres of land, there's no way that something in that part of Manhattan would have ever remained undeveloped much longer after that time period. So anyway, it's the whole thing behind it is that it involves his sort of championing this idea of trying to make America a place that does that kind of scientific learning the way the old world was doing. And he was surrounded by all of these important people like Lafayette and Jefferson and Washington. And so it's, it really, I think, brought alive a time period of history that is fascinating in and of itself, but through the lens of this person that hardly anybody's heard of. So yeah, it was, and she's a professor at Hunter College in Manhattan, and it sounds like an academic book, and it's obviously extremely well researched, but it's remarkably accessible for a subject that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So yeah, it's terrific. American Eden, it's called. Did you have another one you wanted to?
No, because
No? Okay.
I already told you about, this one's Telling the Wolves that I was just talking about with Jackie with the AIDS, so.
Yeah.
I read, and we may have mentioned this before in the show. I don't think anyone's talked about it, right? I don't think. The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang, which is a romance, which is not my milieu.
And you couldn't possibly tell that from the title.
Yeah.
No.
It was
It's
about
not
war.
just
No.
it's a very steamy romance.
It quite was.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like your thing.
It's not
how did
usually
you end
my
up
thing.
with it?
It's a little like,
I know, I was that way too.
but the characters
Yeah.
were so wonderful. They
Yeah.
were. It is very. I talked to our beloved Leanne afterward because she knows a little bit about romances that I don't know, and I guess it is quite formulaic. I mean, it really has all the tropes that you would expect, but she does it in such a clever way, and the characters are so relatable and real. And
Tell them what's the story with the main character.
the main character is, I don't know if they actually define it.
Oh, okay.
She's somewhere on the spectrum. She's kind of what we would have called Asperger's. So she's got some social. She's very, very bright, but she's got some sort of social issues that
And she does very, very well in the world.
she does very well in the world. But she's very cognizant of these issues. Like, she's constantly thinking, like, how am I supposed to behave in this situation?
This
'Cause-
is reminding me of the Rosie Project.
yes.
Okay.
Except
But
it's a
steamier.
switch.
No.
But what? It's sexy. A lot sexier. And it's the switch, like in the Rosie Project.
It's
it
the
was
guy.
man.
It's the
yeah,
guy
this
who
is
is-
the,
yeah.
this is
Yeah,
the woman.
yeah.
And it's not. It's a kind of unexpected plot, even though you know, like from the go, you're like, I know where this is going. It's all going to be happily
Happily
ever
ever
after.
after.
But it's really fun, and it stuck with me in a way that I would not expect a romance to do. I just kept thinking, oh, but they were just lovely.
Yeah.
So that one was.
So has Bridget read it?
I think
Bridget
so.
is our newest
our
reference
resident-
librarian.
current resident
who
romance
is
person.
an expert on romance, which is great because most of us
I think she has.
Don't
I
I'm
would
pretty sure
really
she has.
be
do
surprised if
romance
she
very
hadn't.
often.
No, but it was a nice.
I
mean,
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was. See, and you're not a romance person either. So
I almost never read romances, but
I
every
think
once in a
you could
while,
like it.
someone recommends one that.
It is steamy. You know, there's a lot of sex in it.
Okay.
Just to make that clear.
but I think that's really the characters that
Yeah.
really.
Has she
sell
written
it.
anything else?
No,
on
I
that?
think this was her
think she has
debut.
either.
I think I think this
Okay.
was her first. I think she's quite young.
Interesting.
So, tell us about Valley Forge.
Valley Forge.
Keep
So,
going colonial.
Like, talk about another thing that I
Don't do.
Would never I can't imagine pick. So you would presumably ask, why did I pick up this book? And it is fairly new. It came out in the fall. The only reason I read it is because I am going to our annual software conference that I go to, library software conference, around
Very
the country.
exciting.
And this year it happens to be in Philadelphia, or actually technically in Valley Forge. And I realized that the hotel that the conference takes place in is literally across
Yeah.
the street from the Valley
Oh,
Forge
wow.
National Park. And in fact, there's even like a little underpass that you can get from the hotel, and then you're in, and it's huge. It's this big area that has all kinds of history about not just the events that happened there, but the context of the Revolutionary War. So I figured, okay, I'm going to Valley
Yeah.
Forge. I think the last time I went anywhere near there was when I was probably 7 on some kind of family trip. So I should learn about Valley Forge. And if I have any free time during the conference, it would be fun to kind of
Yeah.
go and see what's there. So that's why I picked this up, but I was surprised how much I liked, like really, again, it reminded me of the kind of writing in
Yeah.
American Eden, where the authors really bring alive a time period that makes you feel like you're there. Everybody knows like the 4th grade,
But-
like 60-second summary of what happened at Valley
Yeah.
Forge, but it was so much more than that, and it was actually really interesting. There was a certain amount, if battles and like military tactics and strategy kind of bore you, there was a
Yeah.
little bit of that, but not actually that much. A lot of it was more about the politics and the characters. So of course the story is that in the winter of 1777, 1778, so this is like 18 months after the Declaration of Independence, and George Washington has 12,000 Continental soldiers, and the war is not going well.
Yeah.
And he's not doing well. there's been a string of failures, and it's like his career is kind of like on a downswing, and people are questioning whether he's the right leader for the times and all of that. And they have to find a place to winter over. Philadelphia has been taken and is being occupied by the British. So the Continental Congress has decamped to some, I forget where they ended up. And so this massive number of sort of ragtag soldiers who have, they've had no food, they're poorly clothed, they have no supplies. A big part of the story is the difficulties in establishing a well-run supply chain, because armies run on their stomach and on medicine and on clothes and like.
Well, the funding too.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Trouble with the funding.
So there was all that kind of stuff going on. It was kind of, it makes you think about how that sort of stuff is done today. And of course, at this time, this was a brand new army that was kind of being thrown together and fighting very different kinds of armies that had European traditions. So it focuses on that winter, but it also puts it in the context of where the war had come from before then. And ironically, it wasn't actually as bad a winter as some of the years around it, but there were some particular times that were just, there was rain that turned into freezing rain, that turned into ice. So even though the whole winter itself wasn't ghastly, there were enough times where it just made it miserable. An interesting thing that I didn't know is it was one of the first times they actually experimented with inoculating against smallpox, because that was kind of a new thing, the idea that you could give people a small dosage of something that would make them sick for a while but then provide an immunity. That was a new idea back then, and it was very risky, and they tried it. And of all the things that they had to deal with during this winter, smallpox actually was almost completely eliminated because they took this on. So there's a whole bunch of other cast of characters that everybody knows too. There was, it's really Washington's story, but Lafayette was in there, and he was like 20. Hamilton was 19.
I know, they were
at the time. They
much
were all
younger
so
than
young,
him.
you know, just basically teenagers. And there was, I think he was a general, von Steuben from Germany came over. There were Germans and the French were getting involved. Lafayette was trying to get the French involved. So there's all of the politics going on of trying to, this close crowd that all revered George Washington and wanted this to succeed. And ultimately it did, but the story of how they got there was really impressive. So at this point, I'm actually kind of excited to go there and spend some time and see where it actually happened. Like I said, I think the star of the story is George Washington, because he's the one who this all fell on. So it talks a lot about his character in a way that I thought that was great.
There's another early American nonfiction. It's called Thomas Jefferson's Creme Brulee.
Oh yes,
and that's really nice because it's about Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings' brother, James Hemings. And so you also get the view from from slaves and African Americans.
That was
really
kind of a
worthwhile.
part of this too, because Lawrence, who was another one of the people in the close group, was trying to encourage slaves and free blacks to be involved in the Continental Army with different degrees of success. So I think that's all we have time for today. But thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next month.